In about July, we come together and think through all the issues that that are going to be before the unicameral. And the unicameral doesn't always listen to us, and they do their own thing, which is just unbelievable. But housing is a huge thing, and there are some kind of major housing issues before them. And we are very thankful for Lee coming to help us understand some of those issues. Lee Heflebower, Heflebower, and my last name is Fickinger, so anyway, but is the Domestic Violence and Economic Justice Specialist in the Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. She's served individuals and families experiencing poverty, homelessness, and domestic violence for over 25 years. In the nonprofit organizations, Lee is the chair of the Nebraska Commission on Housing and Homelessness, overseeing Nebraska's plan to address and end homelessness, and serves as co-chair of the Project Connect Lincoln event and the past chair of the Lincoln Homeless Coalition. So thank you, Lee, for helping us understand these issues.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and I appreciate your interest in this topic. Nebraska, I mean, we tout ourselves as the good life, and it really is for most people, but there are many of our neighbors that are really struggling financially, and particularly when it comes around the issue of housing stability. So today we want to talk a little bit about sort of the background of the issue of housing instability and homelessness, and then kind of dig in more about the specific bills that might be going on. Bear with me as I click through here. So Nebraska does have an affordable housing crisis. Affordable housing is considered to be when a household is paying no more than 30% of their income for household expenses, for rent and utilities. There are many Nebraskans who are paying 50, 60, 70% of their income. It's really leaves them with virtually nothing else other than being able to put a roof over the head for themselves and their families. We also are missing safe and stable housing. Much of our rental properties around the state, particularly in those rural areas, are aging. They're basically falling apart. So for renters who are trying to find affordable housing around the majority of the state, they may have to weigh out, is it affordable or is it up to code? Which it shouldn't be a thing that people should have to ask at all, especially when we're talking about many of these families have young children. And you don't want to place them in a housing unit that is not safe. Majority of what I'm going to be talking about today are related to folks who are low to moderate income and those who are renting. So there are other bills that are in the legislature this year around housing development of housing stock. Many of those are based more around like workforce housing, middle income. I'm not going to go into those today, but I will give you a resource by the end that gives you some places to look for more information if those are some things you are interested in. So I can't even see my own thing. So it's really important to remember. I think sometimes people think that tenants, if for some reason they get themselves evicted or they aren't able to manage financially to maintain stable housing, that that it's kind of their fault, that they should do X, Y, Z to improve their situation. There's also this idea that there are a lot of community supports out there who can get them housed easily if they happen to be evicted. Now, neither of those are actually true at this point in the game. When you are trying to budget every single dollar, you don't really have room for any emergencies to happen. So you may get yourself into a housing unit where it seems like in your budget you can afford this, that you can squeak by month to month, but it doesn't leave any extra room for something unforeseen to come up. For instance, was it last year or 2 years ago, we had really super low temperatures in February, and then everybody's gas bill immediately went up after that, right? When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you don't have any room for that. We ran a study in, can't remember the year exactly, it was several years ago. United Way of Lancaster County had an additional pool of money in 1 year, and we ran a study that between United Way, Community Action Partnership of Lancaster and Saunders County, and Lincoln Public Schools. Lincoln Public Schools has a homeless outreach team, and they work with families that are at risk or experiencing homelessness when they are students in Lincoln Public Schools. They run around 500 kids or so each year that are experiencing homelessness while they're trying to go to school. So the outreach broker from Lincoln Public Schools would identify families that were at risk of homelessness, that needed some financial assistance in order to not be homeless, and collaborated with Community Action to make those payments. And what they found when that was done is that the average amount that it took to keep somebody from sliding into homelessness was about $250. And often that was for car repairs. There is this sense that people who are struggling financially aren't working, people that are homeless aren't working. Many people who are homeless have jobs. They just don't have enough income to afford the housing unit. So if you are perhaps a single mom with 2 kids and you're trying to get yourself to work and them to school and errands run, when your car breaks down, you can't go to work. Many of the entry-level jobs don't have PTO time or benefits. They usually cap people at about 30 hours specifically to be able to stop having to pay that out. So something as simple as a car repair can plunge a family into homelessness. And it is much harder, much more expensive to keep people from sliding into homelessness in the first place than it is to dig them back out once they get in there. And homelessness, even a brief set time frame of that, is really traumatizing. It's incredibly stressful for the parents and for kids who don't know where they're going to sleep the next day, and then they're trying to go to school on top of that. It's really, really difficult. So we want to be sure that we are getting as many supports in place to keep people from sliding into homelessness. And one thing that we're doing with that is ensuring that tenants have really solid rights so that they aren't being taken advantage of by landlords, so that there are things in place that can help them have their housing be more affordable. So we're going to kind of go through some of those this morning. I did also include some information about economic supports. Those are things like childcare, transportation, benefits from the state. Because if you are, again, down to every nickel that covers your bills, if you can get a little bit of help with childcare, then you have more money freed up to make sure that you can pay your rent every month. So they're all intertwined. Housing isn't just sitting here on an island by itself. So, and I did want to share with you also one project that went on during the pandemic. Kind of gives you another sense of how some of these bills were developed and why. The Tenant Assistance Project, that happened in Lancaster County and Douglas County. Representatives from the UNL Civil Law Clinic, Lincoln Commission on Human Rights, Nebraska Appleseed, there were some other partners as well, and volunteer lawyers, went down and just hung out in the courthouse in eviction court, because there was a period of time when evictions were still going on, and then even when the eviction moratorium was put in place, landlords were still trying to evict people. Most renters, low-income renters who find themselves headed to eviction court do not have counsel. They don't know what their rights are. Some of them just don't show up because they think it's just impossible to even win, and or they have to miss a day of work and miss the money to find a new place, so they don't show up. So the Tenant Assistance Project made sure that every tenant that came in had representation, and that they could also get them connected with financial assistance from other agencies. And they had some really great turnouts for that. So without legal representation, I can't read it, y'all, I'm sorry. So what they found, I'll get all these on here. So what they were finding is that without legal representation, tenants were almost always evicted. There was always a judgment against them, or the landlord would show up and the tenant didn't even know what to do. I mean, court can be really, really daunting if you haven't been in there before. So making sure that tenants not only had representation and had somebody to speak for them, that made a huge difference in the number of actual evictions that went through. Ryan Sullivan, who is running, he's a professor at UNL in the Civil Law Clinic. He kind of coordinated this tenant assistance project and did a study off of the data that they gathered from this. And overwhelmingly, I think it was probably around 80% or so of landlords who come to court to try to get their tenant evicted don't follow the proper procedures. They either don't serve them correctly, there's information missing on the forms, there's all sorts of things that a tenant would never know. So having counsel there, it really upped their chances of being able to stay in their unit. It also found that for people who were, when they were being evicted, it gave them more time to get out and find some other housing. When you are, the process for being evicted from your apartment, if you miss a payment, you have violated your lease, there's something that the landlord feels that they need to get you out. When they go to court and you have your court date, the current law says that you can have up to 10 days before you would have to be out of that property. But what they were finding is that almost always, if tenants didn't have counsel, they were expected to be out that day. Like court would be in the morning, they have to be out in the afternoon. I don't know about any of you, but I can't move out of my house or apartment, especially if I have other family members, in like 2 hours. So the up to 10 days doesn't happen. It got much closer, however, when folks had counsel that were able to argue the points for them. So tenant assistance program is just amazingly helpful when they go along those lines. So we're really pleased that they had some really great success in Lancaster and Douglas counties. But you'll see this pop up later as we're talking about some of the bills that are coming up. LB 175 is the Residential Tenant Clean Slate Act. What this does is give an opportunity for tenants, if they have been evicted at some point, to have that removed from their record and have that record sealed. It is incredibly difficult to find housing if you have an eviction on your record. So if you get evicted once, it's very hard for you to get new housing, which means you're languishing in the homeless system for longer than you absolutely have to. This would have an opportunity 3 years down the line for people to have that sealed. And you know, if you're 19 and you rent a place and you goof up, you want to have another chance. You don't want to be out of the luck for getting housing your whole life. What it also does, however, is seal records where the landlord and tenant went to court and the tenant won. Oftentimes, landlords, when they're doing background checks and they're looking at whether they're going to rent to you or not, see that a tenant simply went to court for an eviction and consider that to be a negative on their application. And because we are lacking in affordable housing units in Nebraska, if you're a landlord and you have an open unit, you've probably got 20 applications on your desk at any given time. Are you going to go for the person who has never been to eviction court, or are you going to go to the person who has? So there was a real downfall for people to even go to court, even if they were completely in the right as to being able to keep their apartment. One of the tenant programs that I used to run, we had a gentleman come in and had receipts for every single payment that he'd made, and the landlord was still trying to say that he hadn't paid and was going to evict him. So in those sorts of cases, we don't want to be that something holding people back from being able to stay in their apartment or move into something new. By the way, as I go through this with the one reason I think tenants' rights is so important is that most of us at some point in our life are going to lease a unit, a housing unit, an apartment, or even if it's briefly when you're in your 20s. Has anybody been a renter before? Okay, yeah. And renters don't get a lot of education on this before they start signing the leases and learn about what their rights are. They assume that the landlord is doing things the way they're supposed to, and oftentimes the landlord isn't. Okay, 182. This is from John Kavanaugh. I try to get him just to stay and have a conversation about, because I think about a third of the bills I'm going to talk about were his. But he's a great advocate for housing rights. We really appreciate him. This is changing requirements for a report by the Supreme Court on eviction proceedings. He mentioned this a little bit. In the last session last year, this bill came up to have the Supreme Court list out the reasons why people got evicted, to compile that data and be sure that they're submitting a report. So what happened is that the Supreme Court started issuing these reports, but the data was almost unusable. It was very broad, didn't really give you any sense of what the issues are. Now, as somebody who works in human services, I want to know, why are people being evicted all over Nebraska? Is it because they can't pay their rent? Is that like a top reason that people are going to lose their apartments? Is it that they are behind on their utilities? Is it that everybody got a pandemic dog and they decided to move their apartments that don't take dogs and now they're being evicted? I mean, what is the reason? This, as a human services agency and nonprofits across the state, helps us target our resources to apply for funding to figure out how to help people along. So this bill compels them, again, to do the report in a little more specific manner so that we can be sure that we're getting the information that we need. So 187 requires appointment of counsel for tenants in eviction proceedings. That's in Lancaster and Douglas County. This came almost directly out of the great success of the tenant assistance program. So this would ensure that that is going to continue and that there's actual funding for it from the counties. 237, Senator Wayne. This appropriates funds for a low-income weatherization assistance program. So I talked about a little bit ago, the housing stock, particularly in rural areas, is aging. Lack of insulation, really old furnaces, things like that. Weatherization programs for low-income tenants and homeownership is just a great gift. These extreme reductions in people's utility bills, I mean, they just get so high. Sometimes I've seen people with utility bills that almost cost as much as their rent in the wintertime. It's just ridiculous. So this would appropriate funds for the weatherization programs, which we really appreciate. 248, Senator Vargas. This prohibits discrimination based on lawful source of income. One resource that folks who, who are low income avail themselves of if they're needing some sort of ongoing rental assistance is housing programs such as Section 8 vouchers through their housing authorities or other rental assistance through other nonprofits that are in their areas. It is common, I don't know if you looked at apartments lately. I had to do this for my son. It is very, very common for apartment listings to have a little note at the bottom that says no Section 8. So if you have a voucher or you have rental assistance guaranteed from an agency, you may not be able to find a physical apartment that you can move into simply because of the source of your income. This isn't just about Section 8, though. This could apply to any other source of income that the tenant has. If the landlord is only looking at employment, they may not be considering disability payments, any sort of VA benefits, alimony, child support, all that sort of thing. So this really it's a huge thing. So we're trying to get this in place to be sure that tenants are protected. If they have a way to pay their rent, it shouldn't matter where that comes from. And we do want to encourage landlords to take a chance on folks. In addition to reducing the income discrimination, there's a second part to this bill, and it implements a landlord guarantee program. We put a pot of money out there for $50,000 to cover damages. if tenants who were in one of these rental assistance programs created damages before they moved out, and the landlords would be able to apply for money through this fund. Omaha has had something similar to this in place for a while, and they really haven't had that many landlords apply for it. Surprise, surprise, people who get assistance aren't necessarily going to trash your apartment. So it's been a good thing. But the hope is that with this additional sort of incentive for landlords, that this will encourage them to then be willing to take a chance on folks. Okay, 270 McKinney. My nose. This is changes provisions to the Landlord and Tenant Act here in Nebraska. And it sounds kind of silly, but it requires landlords to have their apartments up to code before they evict a tenant. If they're going to use the legal system to try to get a tenant out of their apartment, it would be expected that they are also following the law and keeping their apartments up to code. There's some horrible housing units out there, folks, that are nowhere near up to code. And but people move in, people get evicted, move somebody else in. And again, with the tight housing market, even if you have a housing unit that is falling apart, there are people who are desperate enough to just get a roof over their head that they will rent that from you, probably for way more than it is actually worth. So this encourages landlords to be sure that they are following the law before they use the law to harm a tenant. .334 is Senator McDonnell. This, and I don't know if John mentioned this earlier. This is the Reentry Housing Network Act. What it provides is a state advisory committee to assist reentrants from the judicial system in finding housing. Senator Kavanaugh talked quite a bit about recidivism. One of the risks for recidivism is not having stable housing. If you were released from prison, you probably have a really hard time finding stable employment. There's a lot of discrimination out there for folks. And if you don't have that income, nobody's going to rent to you. Landlords will also some will just across the board say, if you have any sort of criminal record, I will not rent to you. So to try to provide supports for people when we're asking them to follow the straight and narrow road from now on and not commit another crime, having some place that you know is your home and you don't have to worry about being homeless is a big piece of that. So 545 is Senator Conrad. This is changing the requirements to the writs and eviction proceedings. As I mentioned before, with the current writs, which is writs of possession, this is what when the judgment is against the tenant and for the landlord, and the property is to be provided back, possession is supposed to be provided back to the landlord. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the writs. Changing it from 0 to 10 days and saying at least 10 days. This allows time. If you've gone to eviction court, then you have 10 days to figure out what you're going to do next. You can get your buddies together and move your things out of the house. You can come up with a plan. You have time to go to nonprofit agencies and apply for rental assistance for another place. It just changes the landscape of what it looks like to be evicted and be able to successfully move into a new unit. And as I talked about before, a lot of these folks have kids, little kids, and when you don't have time to move and you're leaving most of your stuff in an apartment behind, you're losing baby pictures, you're losing schoolwork, you're losing birth certificates, social security cards, all these sorts of things. So this can really help, and helps reduce the flow of people that are in the homeless system. Again, if we can keep somebody housed and move them directly into another apartment, not having to go into shelters or, God forbid, on the street or in their car, it's a good thing. So we appreciate Senator Conrad's work on this. Senator Brandt is, this is also another low-income home energy assistance program through LIHEAP. This would provide more money to nonprofits to be able to implement those projects and implement those sorts of programming. 715, again, Senator John Kavanaugh. This requires the governor to apply for emergency rental assistance under American Rescue Plan Act during the pandemic. For those of you that follow the legislature, last year, there was a bill to compel Governor Ricketts at that time to apply for a substantial amount of money through these ERA funds to provide rental assistance specifically to the rural counties. And the governor declined to do that. So this is back again with the new governor, trying to again encourage them to, $48 million goes a long way towards people who are struggling begin to pay their rent. So we're hoping that the new governor will take that to heed and understand really the need that's occurring for low-income folks across our state. 747 is Michaela Kavanaugh. This provides an income tax credit for renters. I like this one. If you're a homeowner, you get a tax write-off when you're doing your taxes, right? But homeownership is really out of reach for a lot of people. And some people just don't want to be a homeowner. They want to rent. So there should be a benefit for them as well with all of the money that they're investing in maintaining their housing. Let me stop this before I move on to economic justice pieces, if we have time. Are there any questions about any of those? Yes?
So the last one, 747, is that income tax credit, property tax credit, income tax credit, is that dependent on being low income? Is that anybody?
I don't believe so. I think it's any renter. That's my understanding. But it's a credit, so it's a little bit different than a deduction. So that's my understanding. I can look more into that for you.
Income?
I believe there's a cap on that. It's $200 or 4% of your annual rent. The greater of $400. Yeah. The greater of $200 or 4% of yearly rent, not to exceed $1,000.
Have most of these, are they still in committee? Like, they haven't even had a hearing? Whereas, do you know how important some of these might be, like especially this next week, that we need to be more urgent on?
I don't believe any of these have had a hearing scheduled. We expect that they'll come up. A couple of them have been shifted around from one committee to the next. But the legislature has just a wild number of bills. I think it's 800 bills. So we're hopeful that some of these will come through. Realistically, not all of them probably will make it. But it's good to raise the awareness, especially with legislatures, that this is something that should be on your radar screen. Yes?
The first 2 weeks of the legislature meeting, there's no debate, it's just all hearings, right? And is it the priority bills that have the hearings in the first 2 weeks?
I'm gonna have to think about that one. There's probably somebody else in here that knows that better than I do. I believe that's what it is. I don't believe any of these are priority bills.
I know there's a place on the site that you can look for that week and coming week on which bills will be debated, right? I think that's good to know, find that place.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know if everybody heard her, but there's a place on the legislature's website. You can look up what bills are coming up in the next week or so and prepare your testimony if you want to come in person, or provide some written comments through their new portal that you have to use. But it's good to get your voices down there, and I particularly think so in these sorts of situations because Again, oftentimes, folks who are low income are, they're working. They can't take a day off to go sit down at the Capitol for 4 hours to get your voice heard, right? So they count on us to be able to go down there and express the importance of this for them. We'd love to see people with lived experience, though, when they can come and testify, but that's not always something they're able to do. Yes?
You're talking about the person who gets the eviction notice needs a lawyer in order to understand what's going on. With no money, how do you get a lawyer?
How do you get a lawyer? With no money. Yeah. So some tenants just don't. They just give up. Basically, they get that first notice and that the landlord's going to head to court, and they just give up. And they just wait until they are locked in their apartment. Right now, within Lancaster and Douglas, the tenant assistance program is still going on and providing counsel. But in smaller communities or smaller counties, sometimes you're able to get somebody from legal aid to help represent you, but they only have so many, such a big caseload. Sorry?
Where do you go get the lawyer in a big city?
Call Legal Aid of Nebraska. And if they are, that's their role, and is providing free legal assistance for people who are low income. So if they can't help you, they can often refer you to somebody who can. And there are some pro bono projects out there through a volunteer lawyers project that can also sometimes provide legal counsel. But I mean, I always encourage tenants, I mean, even if you feel like you've lost, like there's no hope, go to your court date at least, even if it's just you, because if you don't show up, the landlord says, here's what I think, and the judge doesn't see anybody else there verifying anything different, so the judgment will almost always go for the landlord. Other questions? Okay, we'll cover a few of the economic justice legislation pieces here. And I'll go through these fairly quickly. But again, these are things that can be really helpful when you're trying to make sure that your budget as a whole is a livable way that you're going to be able to manage from month to month. So LB 35, Senator Nebr, changes provisions related to child care subsidies. So child care subsidies are when you're working or looking for work and you're getting assistance to pay for your child to be in care during those periods of time. There was a long period of time where the cap for that was for people who were at the federal poverty limit of 130%. So if you're making more than 130%, you can get child care. It was bumped up for a couple of years to 185%, which meant that many more families who were struggling could have child care assistance so that they could work. I mean, it just seems so simple, right? You have to have someplace to put your children so you can go to work. You can't just do them at home. But that is sunsetting. The bill the legislation that had raised that is sunsetting, I believe, in October. And so this bill is asking that be continued for at least 3 more years so we can have some more data on the effect that it had on working families. I don't know if you've looked into the cost of childcare lately, but it is ridiculous. When my kids were younger, I actually figured it out because they were in full-time daycare, both of them young children, and I could have paid their tuition for them to go to the UNL. That would have been cheaper than putting them in childcare. It's so high. So anything that we can do, particularly for families who are really trying to stay employed and trying to work and try to make a difference to their families, I think this is a really good thing. 57, Senator Kavanaugh, is the Paid Medical Leave and Insurance Act. I think I talked a little bit about many, especially entry-level jobs that folks are working, don't have sick leave or paid time off. So if your kid has the flu or you've got COVID or something and you have to stay home with them or you're sick, that means you don't get paid. And if you don't get paid, you can't buy groceries, you can't pay your rent the next month. I've seen people on the brink of homelessness just because the youngest kid brought home the flu and then it went through the whole family. So there were weeks they didn't get paid. This will address that and provide sort of an insurance policy that will be managed by the state that will allow people to get assistance if they're needing to take time off for medical or family leave. There is, I don't know if you're familiar with FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, and folks often think that that's sort of the answer to this if you need to take time off. But FMLA is unpaid time, and it's up to 12 weeks, and you have to be working for an employer that has over 50 people. Many of the folks that we're talking about aren't working in a organization that even has to do that, and often doesn't. So this would allow them for an opportunity to have paid time to take care of family medical issues. And again, just in my time, working with folks who were experiencing homelessness, it is really discouraging the number of people that are without a home, mainly because they have medical debt or they have a disabling condition that doesn't allow them to work, but they have not yet qualified for SSI or the disability benefits. It takes like a couple of years at least to get your disability approved. I don't know if any of you work in that field, but I think there's this myth out there that, I'll just say I have a disability and somebody will drop a pile of cash on my doorstep. It's not how it works. You have to apply and be denied, and then apply and be denied, and apply and be denied before you even have a chance at that. And during that time, you can't be working, right? Because you're saying I can't work and I need disability payments. So what do we expect folks to do? How do we expect them to pay rent or take care of any of their basic needs if they aren't able to work and they aren't getting any sort of disability payments? It's really, we just put them in catch-22 there. So this would help with people who has kind of ongoing and significant medical needs. Okay, 84. 84 is by day, and this does change provisions to SNAP benefits, which are a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Other people know them by EBT, electronic benefits, or it used to be called food stamps. So this would assist, similar to the child care benefits, there was an eligibility increase a few years ago, and moved that from 130% to 165% of the federal poverty level, provided more people with food security. That is, again, about to sunset this fall, so this bill is asking that it retains that higher level. The food costs are outrageous right now. I don't know if you have many of you go to the grocery store. I'm assuming you all do and have seen the cost of even like very basic ingredients. Senator McCavanagh, this is the Hunger Free Schools Act with the intent to provide free school meals for all of our Nebraska students. Again, there's a very high rate of poverty among students in our public schools. And then 233 is, again, John Kavanaugh. So this provides for child support payment disregard. DHHS, when you have a low income, let's say she's low income mother with 2 children, she goes to DHHS and wants to apply for benefits. They expect that that person is receiving child support. And so they consider that income and they reduce the amount of benefits they're able to get based on that. Here's what I can tell you, is that a lot of people don't pay their child support, or they pay it sporadically, right? This isn't like something you can count on the first day of every month. When your rent is due, you will also have a child support payment. Particularly, and I work with domestic violence survivors, particularly when we're talking about survivors who are still having to co-parent with somebody who's been abusive to them, oftentimes they will use a form of financial abuse with their child support as a leverage or way to manipulate their former partner. So child support is not something that you can count on for income, and it should not be something that is that you're going to be assumed that you're going to be getting, because you really have no control over that. So this would increase folks' ability to get ongoing, stable benefits until they can kind of get back on their feet and get employed and then no longer need that. 285, Senator Walls. This is another program to, sorry, let me find my spot here. There we go. So this is another one that ensures that students, particularly those who are living in poverty, are able to get breakfast and lunch at their public schools. Just sort of a different route than we saw with the former one. Yes? This one?
Yeah, it says to serve free breakfast and lunch to all students. Is that low income or is that all students?
It's all students. What this would do is compel school systems to apply for any sort of reimbursement that they would be able to get in order to provide meals to that, for that. But I have to say, I know there's problems that happen out there where there's a lot of stigma around getting free lunch or free breakfast for kids. I mean, oftentimes their peers know. So one way of going about that, in addition to make sure that everybody's getting at least a nutritious meal, is to provide them to all the students.
How does that compare with the other one?
I don't have the information on that. Yeah, Senator Walls.
Yeah. How does it compare with LB 99, just free school, lunches for all periods?
I don't have those numbers with me. I think one good resource for that information, Nebraska Appleseed has, if you go to their website, they have a legislative priorities, and they list out all of the different types of bills. They're related to specific, I'm just putting up a few. They're related to economic security. So if you're interested in a certain area like childcare or food or financial assistance, that's a really good place to see all of those bills that are being presented. So I'm not sure why each senator sort of took a different route on that piece of it.
The one before that, 223, I did not understand that. And is this saying if you do get child support, then you don't count child support payments toward being able to be on ABC or getting food, or getting, I don't know what it was, SNAP?
So it's,
Your child support is
they
don't
are,
need to go toward food as far as being eligible for ABC.
that would not be considered a source of income. When you're,
Be then for
well, and yeah.
housing.
And child support would be phenomenal if everybody was guaranteed to get the full amount of their quarterly child support in their bank account every
But if
month.
you are getting the full amount of child support, then what? Does it matter?
I don't see a difference in the verbiage of this bill as far as that goes. I think it's because when people are fairly low income, oftentimes that other parent is also fairly low income and may not, for whatever reason, pay their child support on time.
To enforce that.
Yes, but we see situations where the parent who's being expected to provide child support will take jobs where they're paid under the table, will go out of their way to not have this happen, not have them have to pay it. And it's all kind of a racket. Hi.
We're about to have a rush to lunch.
Which should be done. Can I talk about one more thing?
Sure.
All right, real quick, y'all, I want to tell you about this resource that is up on the Strategic Housing Framework, was just released. Nebraska Investment Finance Authority, NIFA.org. The whole framework is up there, and it was a huge study. This was done, so it's on their website. The objectives are to come up, basically we're missing 35,000 affordable housing units. So the goal for this housing framework, and probably will guide a lot of the legislation from here forward, all the data that they've been able to collect and it's also important to know that 10,000 of those units are specifically for people who are low income or at risk, including senior citizens. So that's something I would like to note. Also on the sheet that I gave you, several of these say Women's Fund fact sheet on the resources. Women's Fund of Omaha is amazing, and their fact sheets will have all the verbiage and all the stats and everything that you really need when you're writing letters to your senator. So, thank you.
Let's give Lee a hand, thank you.